There we go. What is up, guys? Welcome back to our Fish the Moment live stream. We're having some crazy weather here, so I don't know what's going on with the internet. We may be a little bit in and out. Arkansas is covered in like 6 inches of snow, which never happens. We had like negative 18-degree temperatures last night. No, it's not any better for you up in Springfield, Randy. So they've been doing like power outages all around. So we have no idea what's going to happen on the stream tonight, guys. Fingers crossed we make it all the way through, and we can show you guys some fishing info to help you get through cabin fever. So, Randy, how's it going tonight?
Doing good here, Johnny. Man, just in survival mode here in Southwest Missouri. Man, it's been like way below zero the last couple of nights. I'm having to cut wood to help keep the house warm over here. So it's a good night to talk about fishing because there's no fishing going on around here. Our water's too hard.
You never would think that too, especially on a lake like Table Rock where it's 70 feet deep and yet you have ice on the lake. That's what you were telling me, which is crazy.
Yeah, there's a little lake about 5 miles north of Springfield here, and they're ice fishing out on that thing right now. There's like 6 inches of ice on it, which is unheard of for Southwest Missouri. So, yeah, but it's not going to last that much longer, man. We're getting close to March. I mean, it's going to be warming up, and it'll be gone before you know it.
There's some guys saying here, Randy, they need warm front secrets. It went from negative 13 to 10 degrees. There's that big warm front rolling through. So, awesome. Well, we have a ton of really great info for you guys today on cold front bass fishing. We're going to kind of focus on these like super severe cold fronts because there's guys even in Texas who are dealing with negative temperature days, which I know in Texas right now, a lot of times the bass are even starting to get pre-spawn and some fish even spawn this time of year. So we're going to really break it down, talk to you guys about how we handle these super Arctic conditions we're dealing with, and even just cold front bass fishing in general. The tips will kind of apply both to cold fronts, even if there's one that happens later in the spring, but also for what we're dealing with right now. So we'll kind of cover it all, and hopefully you guys will enjoy us talking about all this. So the first thing we're going to talk about, Randy, here, we're just going to jump straight into it, is the number one misconception that I hear about guys, or I hear guys talk about when they think about cold front bass fishing, and that's that bass go deep when you get a cold front. For whatever reason, guys think that right after a cold front happens, those fish are going to go super deep. They're going to drop out into 20, 30, 40 feet of water offshore, and that's where they're going to be. Now, there are times when that does happen, but a lot of times it doesn't. So I kind of want to talk about some of the reasons why those bass may actually stay shallow even after a cold front, and also some of the areas you need to be looking for. So I'll kind of take the lead on this, Randy, and start sharing my screen, and then you can jump in after that. So let me pull up a lake right here, guys. Now I'm going to be using some different lakes today than usual because we were always using a lot of Arkansas, Oklahoma, and Missouri lakes. So we're going to head over to the East Coast. We got Lake Hartwell over here and a few other lakes that are a little bit different from what we normally talk about. So if we take a look at Lake Hartwell here, this is a deeper, clear lake that's going to be anywhere from 80 to 120 feet deep down by the dam with some clearer water. And then up in the river arms, you're going to have some shallower, dirtier water. But I kind of want to focus more on the main lake where you have that clear water. And if we take a look at a Navionics image of this as well, you guys can see that down in the middle of the lake here, again, super deep water, 170 feet, a lot of deep water like this. Whenever I have a deep, clear lake like this, what I find during these post-front, cold front conditions is that those bass will go deep in this situation when you have that really clear water. A lot of times those bait fish will push out into deeper water, let's say into 80, 100 feet of water, but they're not necessarily going to move far from where they were during the warmer water temperatures. A lot of fish on Hartwell in February, in the spring, they're going to be setting up kind of halfway back in these pockets and coves in the mouths of these little ditches and drains, stuff like this. And what you'll find is that a lot of these fish, even in February, will push way back into these creeks back in here first thing in the morning, even when it's cold, water temperatures are 48 to 50 degrees. But as those water temperatures drop into that like 41, 42 degree range, you'll find that those bait fish will move further out towards the mouths of the creek, towards the main creek channels, and they'll set up deeper, they'll suspend. But they're not going to move, like for example, from the middle of this creek out to the main lake, like way out to the main lake out here. They're going to stay close to where they were, but push just a little bit deeper. And that basically means you're going to have to adjust your approach just a little bit. Now, the big thing you remember is that cold fronts kind of come in two stages, and we'll talk about this in our next tip. But there's usually that time right after the cold front when you still have a lot of wind and you still have a lot of like maybe cloud cover that's in the area, and those fish will stay shallow even right after that cold front hits. But then 2 to 3 days after that, when it gets slick, calm, and sunny, they'll pull a little bit further out here, hang out deeper, and that's where you'll find them. Now, if we change gears and go to a lake that's a little bit different from Lake Hartwell, we're going to go over here to one of the lakes over in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is just some of the lakes I fished before, guys. So just kind of picking lakes, just different lakes, things like that. Lake here we got is Jordan Lake over in North Carolina. Pretty popular big fish factory. And this lake has a lot more stained water, especially when you get further back into some of these pockets and coves. And what is really interesting on a lake like a Lake Jordan is that you have kind of a mix of that clear water that's 2 to 3 feet of visibility, and then that mix of water that's a little bit more stained, let's say 1 foot to 2 feet. And I am not showing my screen here, guys. Let me switch back over to Google Earth. Let me see here. There we go. Here we go. This is our lake over here in Raleigh, North Carolina. So you have that right here, the dirtier water, and you have the clear water right here. And what you'll find is that when you get into this clear water section of the lake, and I pull up Navionics, you're going to have a little bit of a shift from shallower to deeper water, like we mentioned on Hartwell. So if you're out here on the main lake out here, and these fish are maybe a third of the way back in the creeks, kind of getting ready for the pre-spawn, these fish might push out from being kind of halfway back in these creeks, middle of these creeks, out a little bit deeper, maybe out towards some of these main lake points, in 15 to 20 feet of water, staying up on rock and brush. And they will pull out to deeper water when you have, let's say, 2.5 to 5 feet of visibility, a little bit clearer water. However, when you get further up the lake here into this section of the lake, the water gets a lot more stained. And it's not like those fish just decide after the cold front that they're going to swim from the top part of the lake up here all the way down to the bottom end of the lake. They're still up here and they're still catchable. What happens, though, is that those fish are not going to necessarily move deeper, but they're going to move to the warmest possible water they can find. Now, in a lake like Jordan Lake, that's usually going to be any sort of rock cover, and I mean like hard rock cover. So, for example, you might have this riprap road right here, this rocky road. And if you get 2 or 3 days of really bright sunny skies, even if it's brutal cold, like lows in the teens or 20s, the sun will heat up this riprap and heat up the water, and a lot of fish will set up in dirty water, 6 inches visibility to maybe 2 feet of visibility around this riprap here. And you can find that basically all over the lake in different places here. You can find some different riprap roads. And even though the riprap might only be in 3 to 6 feet of water, this is going to be the warmest possible water these fish can find. And because the water's not that clear, they can't really push out too deep, because at some point the bait fish won't go that deep in that really dirty water. So what you'll find is that a lot of your crawfish or bait fish will pull up shallower on these warm riprap banks in 2 to 4 feet of water, even when the water temperatures are 39 degrees. Actually, catch them on the Arkansas River on like rock jetties, just like this rock here, in 38, 39 degree water temperatures in the winter in a few feet of water, fishing, jerk baits, jigs, crankbaits, stuff like that. So you don't have to go deep. Another thing that you'll find is even if you get back in these creeks and you don't necessarily have riprap, if you have any sort of rocky banks, so if you get back in here and there's a little bit like a rocky bank here or any sort of rock at all, that's going to hold heat and it's going to push those fish to those banks. So what I always do whenever I get dirty water and I can't go a little bit deeper, I will push to any sort of riprap, any sort of chunk rock banks and start fishing them. We'll talk about lure selection here in a little bit, guys, but that's at least my thought process on it. So I go deeper when you have, let's say, 2.5 plus feet of visibility. I will push out just a little bit deeper, but when you have that dirtier water, I'll stay up shallow. So what are your thoughts on that, Randy?
Man, I agree with everything you said there, man. Particularly if you're dealing with those mid-depth, deeper water fish. Now, for the shallow water application, I want to go over some stuff with you guys. But first of all, I want to touch briefly on the grass lakes, because we're probably not going to spend a lot of time on that. And I want to sort of throw you guys a bone for those of you that fish in Florida, Texas, some of the TVA lakes, Lake Eufaula, Alabama. After a cold front, the bass are notorious to getting under matted vegetation. If you have a lake, all the Florida lakes down there, or even some of the gator grass, like in Lake Eufaula, anywhere where you have shallow matted vegetation, it's one of the most popular, well-known things. After front, those fish will bury up in the thickest canopy that they can find in the middle of the winter, and that's how you catch them. That's the number one thing. If you're fishing a grass lake that has the big grass flats, like whether it be it could be a milfoil flat, it could be a hydrilla flat, whatever, TVA lakes, Texas lakes, any place that's got these big bass flats, after a cold front on there, it's all about generating that reaction strike initially over that offshore grass. So we may address that later if we get into some questions on that. But what I wanted to target specifically right now in this question is a typical man-made impoundment that probably most of our listeners and viewers spend most of their time on. And I'm going to share my screen here, Johnny.
Yep.
Okay. You see there?
Yep, I got you.
Okay, I'm pulling up Grand Lake, and if you guys, are frequent visitors of the live feed, we talk about Grand a lot, and the reason we do that, it offers a really good representation of the diversity found in most man-made impoundments, as far as the variation in water clarity, the variation in rock structures, wood structures, docks, that type of stuff. So when I'm talking about Grand here, I'm not talking specifically about Grand. You can sort of adjust it to the lake that you're on if you're on a man-made impoundment, because there's something here to offer for you. So anyway, as far as for us giving you guys some tips that can help you immediately, we need to simplify it a little bit so it doesn't get overwhelming. So the first thing that I would suggest after a cold front this time of year, or maybe even over the next month, is isolate your areas to the major creek arms. This right here is this is Drowning Creek on a, I'll just zoom out a little. This is Drowning Creek on Grand Lake, just a major creek arm of the lake. But these major creek arms have bass that live in them all year long. And, you can really knock down the size of a big 50,000 acre lake if you just concentrate on 2 or 3 major creek arms, because there's going to be a large population of bass in there. So what I do, the first thing, like this time of year, what I'm looking for, let's say, for example, we've had stable weather, seasonal temperatures, whatever your seasonal temperature is in this part of the country where Johnny and I live. This time of year, the average highs are like in the upper 40s, maybe right around 50 degrees. If you have those temperatures and then it gets knocked back by a hard cold front, say the temperatures go down 15 or 20 degrees, this is what's going to do to the bass. Let's say, for example, you were catching them on these secondary points like this, these rounded secondary points. In a normal situation, a lot of times, these bass, there's going to be 2 different groups of bass. There's going to be some bass that are maybe hanging in that 5 to 10 foot range on the bottom. And then there's going to be some bass that are suspended out, maybe in this 15 to 20 foot on the point ends and the point sides both. Now, after a cold front comes through, normally what happens is, and Johnny and I will talk about this later in the next tip, is a lot of times you lose your wind and you lose your clouds, and it becomes, bright, bluebird skies with different variations of wind. What happens in those situations, that say, for example, you were catching them on an A-rig or a jerk bait out off this point right here, and say the bass were suspended 5 to 10 feet down, after that cold front, initially you usually have wind with that. And what that wind is going to put those bass shallower on the point temporarily until that wind dies down. Now, once that wind dies down, which is usually like the second day after a front, they move back out on these points and they'll suspend a little bit deeper, maybe 5 foot deeper, again on the point ends and sides. So you just need to adjust your presentation, move out maybe 5 or 10 feet and just look for those bass to be in those small wolf packs on these secondary points. Now, the second thing that I'm looking for is this, after a cold front, is I go back about halfway into the creek and I look for the steepest bank that I can find about halfway back into the creek. And this right here, you can sort of see example. This is about halfway back into Drowning Creek. You got some flats over here. You got some just medium slopes over here, but you got a channel bank right here. And one of the big keys for me after a bad cold front is I get on these channel banks about halfway in the creek, and I parallel these channel banks. And the technique that I'm using is totally dependent upon water clarity. If I'm fishing, if the water visibility is 1.5 or 2 foot, I'm in that 2 to 4 foot range, like crawfish crankbait, some type of a medium diving crankbait. And if you're in a lake, say for example like Lake Cumberland, and you're on one of these steep banks, you may have to move your boat out like in 10 to 20 foot of water, but you're still fishing parallel. You're just out fishing a little bit deeper, like with a swim bait or an A-rig or jerk bait or something like that. But the thing that you'll find after those bad fronts come through is they either get on the vertical, creek banks halfway back in, or they still set up on the same secondary points, but they just position a little bit differently until that water temperature and the air temperature starts to return to normal.
Good deal, Randy. And I think the big thing to notice there, guys, is that the fish are not moving that far in any of those examples. They're not moving 300 yards to where they were earlier. When there's a cold front that comes through, those bass usually just reposition a little bit. They don't move these vast distances, which I think is a big misconception that a lot of guys have about cold fronts, is that these fish make these big moves. It's not the case. Usually they're making small moves, but because a lot of guys think they're moving so far, they overcomplicate cold front fishing, and they struggle because they're trying to make these massive adjustments when they just need to make tiny tweaks to really find them.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing that Randy just mentioned, which is going to be our second tip for cold front bass fishing, is that wind is really key in cold front bass fishing. And this is going to be surprising to a lot of guys. And this is not just like right now where we have these brutal cold fronts. This is any time of the year, whether it's during the spawn, the summer, the fall, doesn't matter. What you'll find with a cold front, if you've been out fishing multiple days in a row during cold fronts, is that the day before the front, you're going to have wind, clouds, sleet, hail, whatever it is, rain that's coming through. And usually that's going to be a really good productive day to catch fish. Then what you'll find is the next morning, you're still going to have some wind and some cloud cover, even though the front is basically passed through. So the day before, windy, cloudy, terrible. Next day, for the first maybe 3 to 5 hours of the morning, you're going to still have some strong winds, some cloud cover, and the fish will still be up shallow feeding. But then after that period ends, you're usually going to have the lake slick off and get completely calm. And then for 2 or 3 days after that, the second and third day after a front, you're going to have glass calm, post-front conditions, no wind, bluebird skies. And there's different ways you need to approach all those situations. So I want to pull up a map here. And Randy, you kind of touched on it a little bit, but I'm going to kind of give one example here. This is just a little lake by my house, and I fished it a ton growing up. And I was actually fishing out here during the pre-spawn, kind of right on the cusp of the spawn one year. It was spring break. Water temperatures were like 58, 59 degrees. And this lake is actually drawn down right now, and I'm using this for an example just so you guys can see what it looks like under the water. This is what the lake usually looks like. And what we were doing to catch our fish is we were actually catching fish on these outside point bushes, throwing spinner baits and chatter baits. And then there was also some bushes that were kind of isolated out here in the middle of these big flats. And there was also some like stumps and just other stuff out on this big flat here that we were fishing in less than 3 to 5 feet of water. And what we did is we fished out on this lake like 3 days in a row because we were out here for spring break. And so the first day we came out, it was pre-front conditions when the front was like just about to roll through or rolling through. And we were just smashing them on spinner baits, shallow water baits up here in these shallow bushes. Then the front started to roll through, and it actually rolled through, and the next morning we came out, there was still wind, there was still cloud cover, it was still kicking, and we were able to catch fish in the exact same areas, throwing the exact same baits, but we had to fish just a little bit deeper. They were really on the outside bushes, or like kind of the outside isolated pieces of cover, just a tiny bit deeper. Then we came out the third day, and if we take a look at this lake drawn down, what you'll see is that there's actually some really interesting stuff out here in the middle of the lake. So here are some of these outside bushes we were talking about, like right out here. You can kind of see them when the lake is drawn down really low. Normally this is in 3-5 feet of water, but these isolated bushes out here all had a bunch of fish on them. And you could catch some fish on some isolated bushes that were sticking out here and over here, for example. But then whenever that cold front actually rolled through and it started getting slick calm, second day after the front, no wind, bluebird skies, those fish pushed from these secluded, isolated bushes out here in 5 foot of water out to these deeper brush piles out here in about 15 to 20 feet of water. And we tried fishing up shallow for a little bit, but we quickly made the change to start fishing some of these brush piles, started throwing actually deep diving crankbaits and jigs because water temperatures were still 56, 57 degrees. And this brush pile right here, my buddy and I doubled up on a 6 and a 7 pounder out of this brush pile. And then there's used to be a good brush pile here. You can kind of see the remnants of it. But right here, right out in front of the bushes we were fishing, in the center of this little gut, caught another 5 pounder out of this brush pile. And our best 5 fish that day went like 25 pounds, 26 pounds. It was our best day, actually, in those post-front conditions because all those big bass congregated on that brush. Now, they didn't move super far. If we take the ruler, for example, they moved, we can't really even measure it in miles. We need to do this in feet. They moved, or maybe do it in yards. Yards is probably the best way to do that. Let me go here. There we go. We'll do that in yards. So they moved 100 yards. They moved a football field, which is actually a pretty decent distance. Normally they don't even move that far. But when you're dealing with offshore fish on these big flats, when there's a lot of flat water like this, they'll move further. However, if you're on a really steep bank, for example, over here, which is one of the areas we were fishing as well, when you have these steeper banks like this, one of the big fish we caught was on a steep bank like this, and we were catching them up here again, fishing spinner baits, chatterbaits, stuff like that. And then the fish pulled out, and we caught like a 4 pounder out of this brush pile right here. This brush pile, if we actually measure that out in yards from where they were, is only 30 yards, 35 yards. They're moving, not very far to get to these brush. But this is where a lot of those fish will go in the post front, second day after a front. Now, again, you have to keep in mind the wind died down when those fish got in this type of cover, this offshore stuff. When that wind is still blowing after the front, those fish are still up here in the shallow water. They might be just a tiny bit deeper, but they'll still be up here. Even if the water temperature drops 8 degrees sometimes, they'll still just be right off the bank until it slicks off and gets completely calm. So that's just one example on one lake. There's a lot of other examples. One thing Randy mentioned earlier is actually that grass, and I'll kind of go over here just real quick just to give you an anecdote on some grass fish. Lake Ouachita's right. Really the one lake down south where I can actually fish grass. And here's a little grassy ditch that I fished. And I've talked about it on Fish the Moment channel a lot. But if you go here, you can see that there's a little grassy ditch. That little coloring here, this is all hydrilla grass. And whenever you get cold fronts, those fish will still be really active up shallow in the grass while the wind is blowing up here on these flats. But then as that wind dies, they'll suck down into the center of this ditch, kind of in this zone right here, getting that little bit deeper water, and that's where you're going to find those fish. After the wind dies down, you have the bluebird skies. So that's at least my 2 cents on that, and it's always worked really well for me. Anything to add there, Randy, on top of that?
Yeah, the wind is like, even though a lot of people are going to be cussing the wind after a front, the wind is going to be your friend to some extent based upon the type of lake you're fishing. Wind becomes more of a friend to you the clearer the lake is, and the more that you have a diverse mix of largemouth, spotted bass, and smallmouth. You'll find that on the lakes that have that mixed species that are pretty equal, and you've got fairly clean water, the days that you have those windy post-front days can be just as good as the days that you have pre-frontal. There's something about it. They don't really get knocked back or affected by that front coming through until the second day, like Jonny was talking, when you lose your wind. If you're fishing a lake that has dirty water, like that water visibility of less than 2 foot, those are the situations where I don't want any wind. It's like I may be wanting the wind on a clear water lake, but on a dirty water lake, I want it to be, little to no wind. It just seems like those fish are a little bit more aggressive. But here, let me share my screen again. I'm going to give you guys an example of what I'm talking about on a typical, not clear but cleaner water lake. And we're going to go to Beaver Lake.
And Jonny, while you go through that, Randy, I can see your screen here. Can you kind of touch on too whether you're fishing fast or slow in each of those situations? Like right. The speed that you're fishing.
Okay, you got my map there?
Yep, I got it. And that was a question from J Mads, just so you know. That's why I called out.
The speed of what we're fishing is dependent upon, again, the water clarity and, basically the amount of wind that you have. If I'm fishing a dirty water lake that has, just that water visibility between 6 inches and 2 feet, I need to slow down after a front because I'm not looking for a reaction strike post front in dirty water. I'm looking for, to get those fish that are a little bit less aggressive. Wind does not necessarily activate fish in dirty water. Actually, it can hurt you because a lot of things you have to consider after a front is how much rain did you get with that front? Because a lot of times rain is associated with the front. If you get enough rain in to change the water clarity any degree at all, it can actually act as a negative, particularly if the water is already dirty. So that's one aspect. But when you're talking about water visibilities of over 3 feet, like we're looking at Beaver Lake right here, that is when you can fish faster. That's when you can not only cover more water, but you can fish baits that move faster to generate those reaction strikes. I'll go over a tournament I had here at Beaver Lake. We had an FLW tournament. It was early March, and in practice, along this is the dam right here at Beaver Lake. I'm sure Johnny's fished down here 100 times on these spots, but in practice, I was just smoking them out off these gradually rounded points out here. South wind, cloudy conditions, 20-mile-an-hour south wind, and I was catching big smallmouth and big spotted bass on every one of these rounded points right here. On the lower end of the lake, clear water, that type of deal. The first day of the tournament, of course, we get the bad cold front come in, and we still had a little bit of clouds. I mean, the temperature dropped 15 or 20 degrees. The wind switched from the south out of the north. We still had, clouds, partly cloudy conditions. So the wind was coming this direction. And I still caught a good bag of fish on a jerk bait on all these rounded points first day of the tournament. Second day of the tournament, I get back to the same area. And this is a big area here. It took me a long time to fish all this stuff through here because you're way out off the bank. I was in 15 to 25 foot of water on these rounded points. The second day of the tournament, bluebird sky, the wind dropped. There was hardly no wind at all. And I got out there and I could not buy a bite on any one of these points with the jerkbait. I had a couple of big smallmouth that followed the jerkbait to the boat and didn't hit it. So finally, about 12 o'clock during the day, I just couldn't get anything going, but I knew those fish were still there. So I took a little 4-inch worm and cut it down to like 3 inches. It was a little bitty worm. I put it on an 1/8-ounce jig head, almost like I was crappie fishing. And I went back over these same points and wound up catching a good limit of spotted bass on these same points that I just could not get bit on a jerkbait. So a lot of times what you have to do is when you have wind and you lose your wind, you simply have to adjust your presentation and your bait selection in the same areas. Johnny made a good point, just what we talked about when he talked about in the first point there, is that these fish don't move far after a front. It's more about a technique change. It's more about a change in retrieve and some other variables that we'll get into just here in a little bit.
Yeah, that's so key, Randy, with the changing your retrieve with the wind and all that stuff, because when that wind is going, you can still catch them cranking, you can catch them on a jerkbait, and this is when water temperatures are 35, 38, 37 degrees, doesn't matter. I've seen it on the Arkansas River where it's like 39-degree water temperatures, and I'm catching them fishing pretty aggressively with a jerkbait or with a big spinner bait, crankbait. When that wind is flowing, when there's current movement, stuff like that, it doesn't affect them that bad. But even when you hit a cold front in the spawn, one thing I want to talk about really quick, just kind of a story about a tournament I fished. I actually won a junior state tournament, and it was pretty funny because I was fishing in like the biggest community hole on Lake Dardanelle, and I won this tournament fishing behind everybody and their uncle. And basically, there was a bunch of fish that were setting up in all of these bays. This is Newton Bay and Mill Creek. If you fish Lake Dardanelle, it's like this is the two biggest community holes in the entire lake. Well, what was happening is that the day before the tournament, everyone absolutely smashed them, throwing spinner baits, chatterbaits, things like that. It was kind of pre-spawn, spawn time of the year, and you could just go down the bank throwing any bait in the tackle box and catch them. And so what happened is that during the tournament, everyone was doing those exact same things, but the cold front had rolled through, and it was the day after the cold front, and what happened was that even that morning there was no wind, and there was definitely not any wind back in here because it was protected. And what happened is that those fish in the day before were setting up in some of this grass and like some of the stuff around here, and they were right on the edge, like right on that edge, and that's where you get all your bites, right in through here. And everyone's just going through those reaction baits, fishing super fast. What I did is I went behind everyone all day. I was just going right behind people, and I fished about 2 to 3 feet off the edge of the grass, all throughout this area, 2 to 3 feet past the edge, and I was dragging a black neon tube as slow as I could and like dead sticking it on the outside edge of this grass. And I had 17 pounds of the tournament. I jumped off like a 4.5 to 5 pounder, so I should have had about 22, 23 pounds. Won the tournament by like 5 pounds. And it was one of those days where I was not fishing anything crazy. Like I just knew there was a bunch of fish in these bays. Didn't have much time to practice. So I just went like around any sort of shallow, like rock, grass, anything like that, and just slow and methodically fished. When there was no wind, it was bright bluebird skies, post front, went right behind people, and I caught them. And that's actually one of the reasons I love fishing post front, especially when it was tournaments. I was like, at some point in like my junior club, Randy, I think I was like 9 for 9 in post front tournament wins over like 4 years. So everyone, when we got to the lake, they're like, oh, post front, Johnny's going to win the tournament. And it wasn't because I was doing anything crazy. It was just I was the only one who had the patience to like sit down and like just grind it out, fishing slow with a jig, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, awesome. Well, there's a bunch of questions here. I want to get those here in a second, and we also have a bunch more tips. But before we get into that, we have 3 more things we want to talk about, 3 more tips. Before we get into that, guys, I wanted to let you know about some stuff that we have going on over at fishthemoment.com. Got to pay the bills, so that's what fishthemoment.com is for. If you guys like the content we're doing here on the live stream or on Fish the Moment YouTube channel or Randy's channel, head over to our website, fishthemoment.com. A couple of things we have going on. First is an upcoming virtual seminar. The virtual seminar we're doing actually this Thursday is our pre-spawn tournament patterns seminar. We're going to be focusing on the best techniques to catch big fish for tournaments in the pre-spawn. And we're going to be covering lakes all across the country, as many different styles of fishing and things like that as we can. This is going to be focused, though, on man-made lakes. We can't cover every lake in the entire country, so we're going to limit it to man-made lakes, but we're going to be talking about clear water, dirty water, grass fishing, everything like that. All the patterns you need to know, and I'm also going to be using some of the data that I used in one of my recent videos to pull some statistics on the best baits and techniques, cover structure, stuff like that, in pre-spawn tournaments from the past 10 years of the Bassmaster Elite Series. So definitely going to be an information-packed webinar. If you want to sign up, just over at fishmode.com, and we have a few spots left. I opened up a few more spots, but I don't think we have any more than maybe 5 or 6 left. So definitely go sign up for the seminar. Definitely going to be helpful for your tournament anglers. Also, obviously, have our other seminar here, How Weather Affects Bass. I'll get into that into another live stream. It's going to be an awesome seminar, but don't want to take up too much time here. But one thing I do want to talk about are some of the lake breakdowns we have available that Randy's been working on. These lake breakdowns give you 40 GPS waypoints on lakes all across the country. You have detailed area descriptions and keys to fishing the lake. You can put these on any fish finder, and we have information on how to do that. And Randy's been just pumping these things out on all these lakes, these spring fisheries. We also have opened up a lot more personal lake breakdowns. Usually we only offer 4 each week, and they sell out really fast. But because we have because we have some time with all the cold weather, Randy has more time to do some personal lake breakdowns. So if you ever wanted to get a personal lake breakdown from Randy, 40 GPS waypoints, now is the time because we have a bunch available on the website. I think we have 8 right now available. So check these out. Enough of the promotions here, Randy, but let's get back into it. Let me pull up the screen and talk about the next thing. But any comments on the lake breakdowns? I know you've been like just bunkered down working on those like crazy.
One quick comment I know we had a couple of requests for Lake Mead. Actually, I'm working on Lake Mead right now. I'll have it done actually tonight. And we had a comment on Lake Falcon, and you must have read my mind because I'm going to start Lake Falcon tomorrow morning. So we'll have that up on fishthemoment.com within the next day or two, Falcon and Mead.
Awesome. Good stuff. So let's jump into the next topic. So next thing I want to talk about, especially with the cold fronts that we're dealing with right now, Randy, it's kind of really going to be a factor, and that's the shad kill. Sometimes when you get these cold fronts that come through, like we have right now, where it's like Arctic cold, you get the shad kill. And that's basically when water temperatures get below 45 degrees, I would say on average. The shad in your fishery are going to get shocked by that cold weather, and they're going to start floating up to the surface. And it's kind of just like a buffet for the bass. The bass can just come and gorge on those shad. It can get kind of tough because there's so much bait that's easily available to the bass that it's hard to actually get bit. But it also gives you a good opportunity potentially to catch some fish. So let's kind of get into that. One thing I want to talk about since we're here on Lake Dardanelle is share a story I have on the shad kill in one of my videos I had made. And basically what happened is, this is a kind of a really specific example, but hopefully you can kind of get some lessons out of it. If you go here to the mouth of Piney Creek or Piney Bay on Lake Dardanelle, water temperatures on the day I was fishing in January were like 43, 44 degrees. So right on that cusp of having the shad kill happen. And it was interesting because out here near the main part of the lake, the river was a little bit colder because the water was coming in that was getting dumped in. So the water was a little bit cooler, a little bit colder back here on the main river. And it was a little bit warmer back in the bay in here where there was less water coming in. As a result, the shad kill was happening literally halfway through this little creek arm. And it's kind of a very unique situation where you could almost draw a line where the shad kill was happening, where the water temperatures were colder south of this line and then they were fine north of this line. And for whatever reason, right where that shad kill really stopped happening, but there was still like a few shad that were dying, just a handful of shad. Basically, it turned out to be this area of this creek. You could catch a lot of fish, and I caught a 6 and a 7 on that day throwing a jerkbait. And a jerkbait's a great shad kill kind of bait when those shad are just starting to get stunned. But for whatever reason, when you get down to this part, all the shad were just like dying and floating up just because that water temperature got a little bit colder. And you couldn't buy a bite here because there was just so many dead shad. It almost looked like leaves floating on the water, like a carpet of shad all over the place. And so a lot of those shad actually were starting to push into this part. So there was quite a bit of shad in this part of the creek that were still alive and like swimming, but there was enough of them that were getting stunned that there were a few shad here and there. And that's what I always find with that shad kill, is you need to find that boundary, if you can, of where those shad are just barely getting stunned by the water temperature, but they're not like dying in mass quantities and floating on the surface. And then if you do have a situation where there's so many shad everywhere and they just like are completely covering the lake, I actually try to avoid the shad then and try to find fish that are feeding on crawfish or some other type of forage if possible. And sometimes you just get out there and if there's just a shad kill going on, it's just going to be tough fishing. Usually you can find some part of the lake where you can run around and find a place where it's not happening, whether it's way back in the backwater or somewhere. So just kind of be on the lookout for that. But that's something that I've experienced. I know you have some strong thoughts on shad kills as well, Randy. So what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I actually did a YouTube video on my YouTube channel on shad kills today, so it's sort of timely on that. I'll just tell you guys sort of what I've experienced with it, because I fish a lot in the winter, so I've really studied the shad kill and what it does. And Jonny made the best point that you can make regarding shad kills. You have to find the area of the lake that is least affected by it, and this depends again on the type of lake that you're fishing. But normally there's a part of the lake that simply just doesn't have as much dying shad. So what you have to do is you have to find that area, and then you also have to find that area that has the right water clarity for the cold water conditions. Like, for example, you may not have as many dead shad dying way up in the back of the creeks or up in the upper river arms, but those areas aren't going to be as good in cold water. So for me, I always try to look, in a typical medium to clear water impoundment, I'm trying to focus on the mid part of the lake. I find that there's, even though there's some dying shad there, like Jonny said, that you don't have those big, vast, carpeted looking areas of dead shad in shallow water like you do sometimes at the lower end of the lake. And that is what is the most time consuming part about it. But basically, to save you guys a lot of time, like right now, as soon as this water thaws out, I'm sure a lot of you guys have ice on your lakes right now, but as soon as that ice goes out, or as soon as you get on the water, try focusing on that mid part of the lake. I think you're going to find less dead shad there. Secondly, with that is technique wise. One of the things I talked about in my video earlier is like, I still want to fish a jerk bait during the shad kill, but I want to downsize my jerk bait. So I go to the smaller 2-hook models. It seems like that works a little bit better. And then also, a blade bait, a small jigging spoon works really good because to me, you've got two different type of dying shad. You've got those dying shad that are floating around on the surface and they're barely moving on the surface. And then you have those ones that are sinking to the bottom, fluttering up, sinking to the bottom. A lot of times you see them you can see them 5 or 10 foot down, moving around like that. And that's when the jigging spoon and the blade bait works good. And lastly, like I covered in the video, is one way you can get completely away from this is go back, into the creek arms about halfway back in, like we just talked about on the first point after the cold fronts come through, and get in there and fish shallow with like crankbaits. It seems like there's always a population of fish that you can catch doing that you don't have to worry about that shad kill being a factor, because these are crawfish eaters you're targeting. You're targeting these bass that are resident bass or rogue bass are living in less than 10 foot of water, and they're not as concerned about the shad as they are the crawdads. So those are the 3 factors like that. Main thing about to remember this is that it's going to be tough. After a shad kill, you can lower your expectations for success because it's going to be a lot tougher than it is, until that whole cycle runs through. And normally what happens is once all those shad die and they fall to the bottom, that's when like the catfish start eating them and the bass don't mess with them that much. But just expect fishing to be tough for a little bit after the shad kill happens.
Good deal. That's awesome info there. And there's a ton of questions. One question we got, guys, is about if this information is specific to a certain time of the year. One thing I'll say is that when I'm thinking cold fronts, I'm usually thinking when those cold fronts are dropping the water temperature significant amounts. So that's usually going to be more in the spring or in the fall. I don't see cold fronts affecting bass nearly as much in the summer and the post-spawn early fall. Well, the big thing is that they change the sky conditions. So it'll go from overcast, cloudy skies to more of the sunny conditions, and that will move the fish. But it's kind of, when I'm thinking like real cold front fishing, it's going to be spring and fall. But a lot of the tips still apply regardless. So a lot of stuff we're talking about, other than maybe the shad kill, because that doesn't happen in the summer, but a lot of the tips we talked about in the beginning of the video do apply. And you'll find that fish will move shallow to deep even in the summer after a cold front, like we described. They're just not going to move a super huge distance, but they will move up shallower and feed in shallow grass, and then move back out to offshore brush piles in the summer for sure. So I would say most of the information is going to apply in general, depending on your lake. There's always so many factors with water clarity, type of vegetation, the species of fish, but we're giving you the best we can to try to be broad and still give you good tips. Would you agree there, Randy?
I'm just looking at one of the comments here from Mike Christian. He goes, I can't lower my expectations anymore after the last couple of weeks. That's awesome. That's sort of the way it is out there right now, guys. You're just join the crowd, man.
Yep. So next topic we want to talk about, and I'm actually going to address a question that we have over here about how to fish cold, muddy water. There's a lot of guys who are saying, man, my water is cold and muddy. That's like a recipe for disaster usually in bass fishing. So we want to get into that a little bit. And the fourth thing we want to share with you guys is the baits that we use in the super cold water or in post-front conditions. And I have a series of baits that I throw, and I really kind of focus on them in all different water visibilities, so I'll talk about those. And then I know you have some baits as well, Randy. So I'm going to pull up my baits here on Tackle Warehouse just to kind of give you guys an idea of what I'm looking for in terms of baits, profiles, things like that. So and I'm going to make this a little bit more specific to the springtime, guys, just because that's the season we're in. I have other baits I throw in post front in different conditions, but for now I'm going to focus specifically on the springtime cold fronts from January through maybe April. So my number one bait after a cold front, especially after the water temperatures get really frigid, dropping into the 45-degree range, is a jerkbait. A jerkbait is just really, really hard to beat, and the big thing I want from a jerkbait is a very slender profile on my jerkbait, and that's why I'm picking up the Vision 110 series of jerkbaits. Now, if I duplicate this slide, some jerkbaits you may hear me talk about as well. I like to throw the Pointer 100 a lot, Lucky Craft Pointer 100. The thing about the Pointer 100 is that it has a really wide wobble to it. And so if you're throwing this bait, it's usually better when the water temperatures are above 50 degrees, and it has a lot wider turn, side-to-side action. So I like throwing the Vision 110s because they're that thinner profile, and I'm usually going to something that's pretty slender. I'll let Randy kind of talk about jerkbaits a little bit more because he obviously knows a lot more than I do, but just like a Vision 110 plus 1 is going to work for me really well. Something like this. Again, I'll let Randy, he's the jerkbait guru, so not going to spend too much time talking about that. I know he will. But one of my favorite baits, honestly, guys, fish in the post-front conditions, that cold, muddy water, is a flat-side crankbait. My number one go-to flat-side crankbait is the KVD 1.5 flat. It's like $5, hard to beat, and I just get it in the chartreuse blueback like this, or some sort of crawfish color, depending on my water visibility. I will throw it in like a red pattern, some sort of red crawfish color. Trying to find like this chili craw. I like this chili craw color a lot. I'll throw this when I'm dealing with 2+ feet of visibility, water visibility, and then I'll throw the powder blueback chartreuse when you're dealing with really stained water, 0 to 2 feet of visibility. And for whatever reason, when those fish get in those post-front conditions, that KVD 1.5 flat, it's a flat-side crankbait. It's basically, there's not like an overhead view, unfortunately, but it's a really thin crankbait, flat-sided. And that's key a lot of times for me in those post-front cold conditions. And I catch them on this bait even in really muddy water. You would think with that crankbait, it'd be weird to fish like a crankbait when it's 40-degree water temperatures, but I've actually caught them on Lake Dardanelle literally when water temperatures are 40, 41 degrees on the main river. If we go back over to, actually I can use Lake Jordan as an example here, on the main river, but wherever really, on riprap, when water visibility was no more than 6 inches, maybe a foot of visibility. And what I'm doing is I am casting that crankbait out, letting it get into the rocks, and that crankbait, that KV 1.5 flat, dives anywhere from 6 to 8 feet deep. I'm going to be throwing it on 10-pound fluorocarbon line, really light line, cranking it down to the rocks, and then just barely turning my reel handle enough to keep that bait in contact with the rocks. Now I'm going to work it out from, let's say, a foot of water all the way out to about 5 to 6 feet of water on any sort of riprap banks, rocky banks, and I'm just crawling that bait. And I made a YouTube video about this. You can just look up Fish the Moment winter crankbait fishing. I've actually made a video showing me catching these fish, caught some 3.5 pounders, some 4 pounders doing this. And water visibility is, again, super dirty, super cold water. 1 foot of visibility, 40-degree water temperatures, and I catch them doing that. And that's really my go-to way to catch them whenever the conditions get like that. I just pick up a flat-side crankbait, find any rock in the lake. It doesn't matter if it's a riprap bank, if it's the dam at the bottom of the lake, whatever rock you can find, crank that rock. If you don't have rock in those situations, that's when the fishing gets really, really tough. But what I'll try to do is I will get a little bit deeper off the bank. Let me pull up this. And the bait that I usually go to in those situations is some sort of double Colorado spinner bait. And I will just grind that thing slow, deep. And so what I'll do is I'll get a double Colorado or even a single Colorado in a 1 ounce spinner bait, something like this, a 1 ounce spinner bait, and I'll just crawl that thing super slow and deep. And what that does a lot of times, for whatever reason, those fish like that slow, grindy spinnerbait, even in 40-degree water temperatures. And you're not going to get a ton of bites on this or on the crankbait, but if you can hit this around any sort of stumps, any sort of lay down, something in the water that holds heat, something that captures heat, that can be a great way to get bit as well. But just both these baits, I'm crawling it as slow as I can. Now, one thing to call out about the KVD 1.5 is that it casts like a potato chip. So whenever I get those cold post-front conditions and it's still kind of windy, I will go over to the Megabass Flat Slap. This is the diving flat slap. It's the only flat side crankbait that's that thin that you can actually cast with a bait caster into the wind. Color selection on this, usually I'm going, there's not like a lot of crawfish colors or like dark colors, so I go to this perch. This is the one I throw. It's got the dark back. It kind of resembles a little bit of the crawfish, a little bit of the black back chartreuse. This is what they have. This is what I throw. And it's just the only flat side crankbait that I can find that I can throw into the wind. But if I don't have a ton of wind, I'm going for the KVD 1.5 flat. Basically just being price sensitive there. So those are some baits I throw. And then if I'm going offshore, let's say I'm fishing a lot deeper and you have some clear water and you're dealing with those really slick off post front conditions, what I like to throw is my Fish Moment offshore jig. And the reason I like this jig specifically, other than the fact that it comes through brush really well, and you guys have seen me talk about this jig, double cable guard, it comes through brush. I'm usually fishing this around the thickest cover I can find. Brush piles, rock piles, just as thickest cover I can find. The reason I like this jig, though, especially in the post spawn, is that, or in the post front conditions, is that the way we design this jig, we have a very long skirt. And usually I'll actually chop the skirt a little bit when I'm fishing in just regular conditions. I'll cut it so it's maybe a quarter to eighth of an inch from the hook, the bend of the hook. But whenever you're fishing in post front conditions, the water is cold, the fish are lethargic, I like a bigger profile jig. And I'll actually only cut maybe a half an inch off the bottom here and leave a good half an inch, maybe 3/4 of an inch of skirt below the jig. And I will put a big beefy trailer on there, like a Zoom salty chunk, something big and that moves a lot of water. And I'll just fish that big heavy jig, it's a 5/8 ounce jig, but really a big bulky jig, in any sort of brush and cover. And you can fish this bait even down rock walls, riprap. I've caught them down riprap on this in dirtier water, in this black and blue, or like this color, the black and chartreuse Missouri craw. This is a great way to get just a few bites, just really slowing down, grinding it out. And that really works well for me. The only other thing I would do in that kind of post-front condition that Randy mentioned a little bit is go to a really finessey bait. And really the way I would do that is just go to a Zoom trick worm. Some guys might throw a Ned rig or whatever it is, but I go to not even a trick worm, I go to the finesse worm. Let me find that. Just the Zoom finesse worm, 4.5 inch, just a really small worm. I'll put it usually in a black color. I like black in post front conditions, even in clear water. I don't really know why, but I'll just go to a black on a little 1/8 ounce or 3/16 ounce shaky head, and I'll just drag that around. Clear water, dirty water, doesn't matter. Those fish are really tough to catch. You can get them to bite a black shaky head in any conditions, any water clarities. It's kind of just like a go-to backup bait when all else fails. So those are kind of the baits I throw. Not a lot of options in that post-front for me, especially in the spring, but that's kind of what I go for. So Randy, I'll toss it over to you and let you get into it.
Okay, yeah, I'm going to share my screen here.
Yep.
Real quick. Yeah, 2 of Johnny's baits are on my list as well. The Megabass Flap Slap and the jerk bait. And for me, a lot of it depends on, there's a couple different things. It depends on the water clarity, type of species of fish that are in the lake, and the wind as far as the, my lure choices on there. So those are going to depend a lot. And also it's going to depend if I'm fishing a grass lake versus a rocky type lake. So I'll sort of talk through that a little bit. My number one, I agree with Johnny, my top of the list is a jerk bait, Megabass Vision 110, 110+1. This is the bait that I'm throwing post front as long as you have wind. As long as I have wind that's, over 5-10 miles an hour, I think that after front that creates a reaction strike from those bass that you really can't, get any better with. I think a jerk bait is with the number one post front bait when you have water visibility like over 2 foot. And this is even true on grass lakes. Even if I'm fishing a grass lake like a TVA lake, or if I'm fishing a highland impoundment or whatever, it's going to be the jerk bait into those situations. Second to that is, I'd agree with Johnny, the flat side crankbait. There's 2 different ones I'm going to throw, actually 3. I throw the Megabass Flap Slap, I throw the Megabass Sonic Side, and I throw just a homemade model flat side crankbait that's made out of cedar based upon the water clarity. What I'm looking for in that is anytime you're fishing the flat-sided crankbait, is I'm basically just going back into just secondary cove arms. This is again the just a main creek here, Beaver Lake. I go back in these secondary cove arms, and I'm looking for water visibility of less than 3 feet when I'm fishing the flat-sided crankbait. I want steeper banks, places that I can parallel. I'm looking for those bass to be in that 2 to 5 foot zone. And if you've got a post front situation and that water temperature is under 50 degrees, it's really hard to beat a flat side crankbait. So that sonic side flap stop is going to be my number 2 choice. Number 3 choice, again, it all depends on the wind situation. But if I lose my wind, the 2 other baits that I'm using are a shaky head and a Ned rig. Normally that time of year after a post front, I'm going to just the regular Zoom trick worm. Color depends on the water clarity that I'm fishing. I'll use anything from watermelons, green pumpkins, black, June bug. Just depends on the water visibility that we have. But if you have a situation where you lose your wind, a lot of these secondary points in these creeks, fishing with that shaky head or the Ned rig is going to work really good. On the Ned rig setup, I use that Zoom beat down worm on the Ned rig head. I use a fairly heavy head because I'm not necessarily wanting to finesse those fish out by dragging it real slow on the bottom. So I want a bait that is going to be on the bottom, that's fairly diminutive, yet that's going to get me those strikes from those less aggressive bass. And the last one, my 5th one, which is probably right up there with the jerk bait for me, is a lipless crankbait. The 2 that I use is just the regular old rattle trap or the Megabass Vibration X. If I'm fishing water depth that is like over say 10 foot deep, where I'm wanting to get that bait either down into deep grass or down like on the edge of steeper banks, I'm using the Megabass Vibration X because it's a really good fall lipless crankbait. It pumps really well. It tracks the bottom really well. But if I'm fishing shallower than 10 foot deep, a lot of times I'll go just to the old rattle trap, 1/2 ounce rattle trap, 3/4 ounce rattle trap. One thing that you'll find, guys, is in the pre-spawn or late winter, if you've got a lake that has less than 5 foot of visibility, a lipless crankbait is a killer post-front bait. I mean, it really is. It's like it generates a reaction strike depending upon the speed that you use it. You can slow it down. You can crawl this bait just along the bottom. And I think that maybe you guys heard, either the YouTube video I did on my channel or even talked on this. I think we may have covered a little bit in a past live stream. But the biggest 5 fish limit I have ever caught in my life was a post front situation, Lake Murray, early March, water temperatures in the upper 40s. And I caught 5 fish that would weigh probably 36 to 37 pounds on a lipless crankbait after a front, slow rolling that bait down onto those, just like this right here. It was just like a cove arm like this, just slow rolling that lipless crankbait at a 45-degree angle halfway down these cove arms. And those big pre-spawn bass were staging out there in that 8 to 12 foot zone. So that's a deadly technique that time of year. So again, my 5 is a jerkbait, number 1, flat side crankbait, shaky head, Ned rig, lipless crankbait. And I think you'll find that those 5, you can catch them about anywhere in the country to some extent on them.
100% agree. That lipless crankbait's a good bait there too, especially on grass lakes. If they get in the grass, you can get a good reaction strike post front on that too. We need to make a video about that lipless crankbait bite. My buddy down in southern Arkansas is always talking about how he throws lipless crankbait down 45-degree banks and rips them. And he always is like saying, man, you got to learn this technique. I've never actually gone and done it with him, but like that's his number 1 way to catch him down there. And he's going on like Lake Washita, places like that, throwing the trap 45 degrees to the bank. It's kind of a cool deal. We need to make a video on that because I want to learn. You need to teach me your ways.
I never would, until Jonny and I started doing these Fish the Moment stuff together, I never would have given that up before. That's like one of my secrets again that Jonny has just squeezed out of me for everybody.
We're gonna get every secret out of you, Randy, by the end here. Nothing left. It's probably gonna take 5 years to get it all out of you. There's still probably some stuff you're holding on to that's like, super secret.
You always develop new techniques. I mean, there's stuff evolving all the time, man. It's never stationary.
Oh yeah, for sure. So let's jump into the last topic here, Randy. And if you could stop sharing your screen just for a second. Last thing that we wanted to touch on is the fifth factor that we take into account when fishing in these post-front conditions, and that's color selection. Color selection can be really key post-front, specifically because you need to make a color change depending on how the conditions go. To explain that, I'm going to pull up some stuff on Tackle Warehouse and just give you an idea of how we change our colors a little bit depending on how the fishing develops. For example, when I'm going out in post-front conditions, and we'll just take, let's go to the Fish Moment offshore jig here for a second. Whenever I am fishing post-front conditions, there's going to be some weather change that happens. First thing in the morning, you have, like right after a front, you're going to have wind, some cloud cover, and even as the front's rolling through, you're going to have some wind and some cloud cover. And if I'm fishing on a clear water lake, 2 to 4 feet of visibility, my normal color might be like a peanut butter and jelly jig. When you're dealing with wind, cloud cover, and even if the water's pretty clear, 5, 6, 7 feet of visibility, a peanut butter and jelly jig can be really effective because you have some darker skies, darker clouds, things like that. But as the weather changes and you get the day after the front or later on in the day, even right after a front, the wind will die down, the sun will be really bright, and one of the easiest ways to get a few extra bites is to go to a color that's a little bit more neutral or more natural. So for example, switching over to a color like this, which is a watermelon candy color jig, that can make all the difference in just getting you a few extra bites. It's just a little more natural. You can get a few extra bites on it. And that's kind of how we developed this jig profile color selection with Jewel, is I kind of wanted a jig color that I can use in clear water when it's fish are really aggressive. The cloud cover, kind of windy days, that's the peanut butter and jelly. Then when it gets really tough, slick, calm, you have your watermelon candy color. And then as you get into more stained water, when those fish are really aggressive and active, I really like this Missouri craw. It's a black and a chartreuse. It really kicks and stands out in that dirtier water, 1 to 2 foot of visibility. And when those fish are really aggressive, when the front's rolling through, you can hammer them on this. But then as that sun starts to creep out, it gets a little bit brighter skies, less wind, I'll switch over to this more blue, more natural color. It still is pretty bright, but that blue is kind of a more natural palette, and so we'll go to the black and blue jig, and that for me gets a few more bites when that sun is out. So I'll go to the Missouri craw when it's darker, cloudier skies, and the black and blue when you get those bright bluebird skies. And the same thing happens when you're fishing some sort of crankbait, or jerk baits. Like if I have a Pointer 100 pulled up here, when I'm fishing in really calm, slicked off conditions, one of my favorite colors that we always threw, let me find, there's so many colors in all these jerk baits. One of the colors we always have tied on, oh my goodness, I need to pick a different bait. Here it is. Well, it's the ghost minnow color. I'm missing it. Give me a second here, guys. This'll work. Like an orange ghost minnow. Basically, it's something that has more clear belly to it. This is a great color when you get those bright bluebird skies, no wind in the post front. But then when the front's rolling through, I'll go to a much brighter, flat, matte side finish, and I'll pick up a color like this citrus shad, where you have a white with the blue back. This is kind of my deal when you have the front rolling through. So really the key is going to more of those muted natural colors, for me at least, when you're fishing in those bluebird sky conditions, not a lot of wind. And then as the wind picks up, go to those brighter, bolder colors. And making that small adjustment might not seem like a big deal, but it can make a huge difference. And you won't even have to change the profile of your bait. You just change the color, and that can make a big deal. So definitely check out those different bait colors. If you do want to check out some of these jigs, it's the Fish the Moment Offshore jig by Jewel Bait Company. You get 2 jigs for $6.99, so it's a 2-pack for $6.99. It's like $3 a jig. Premium hook, premium skirts. There's no other skirt like this in the market, and we designed it so it's super customizable. Double cable weed guard comes through brush better than any jig on the market. Randy can attest to that. I can show you guys video proof of that. It's amazing. And you can pick them up on jewelbait.com, Fish Moment Offshore jigs. So just check that out. But Randy, what are your thoughts on color selection?
Oh man, color is so important. I mean, it's like I don't think you can underestimate how important color is, although that you have to have a foundation to begin with, because there are so many color options out there that it's intimidating to even professionals. I mean, just like Megabass, they make like 140 or 50 different color jerkbaits. So, I mean, I've been with Megabass for over 30 years and I haven't even used all the colors they have. So it's really intimidating there. But I'll sort of give you guys what is my foundation that I think will really help you guys out. A lot of it depends on water clarity. Water clarity and sky conditions are the two dictating factors in color. There's never any absolutes, but you have to start somewhere. One thing that I'll tell you, and I'm going to talk about two different things. I'll talk about moving baits like crankbaits, lipless crankbaits, and jerkbaits. What I found out about post-spawn fish on crankbaits, like any type of, whether it be medium diving, shallow crankbaits, the flat-sided ones like the flap slap, square bill crankbaits like the Megabass S crank, whatever, is that right off the bat, if you can get them to bite some type of a fire tiger or a chartreuse, that's going to usually produce the biggest fish of the day for you. Normally, that's what I start out with earlier in the morning when the low light conditions are, regardless if it's bluebird sky or have clouds on it. I want to start out with that fire tiger, whether it be my lipless crankbait or my lipped crankbaits, either one. Fire tiger is really good. Second thing that I do is I let the day unfold as far as the water clarity that I'm fishing and the light intensity. And it's usually two different changes based upon that fire tiger. I go to either some type of a shad pattern, like the MB gizzard shad that Megabass makes, or some type of a crawfish pattern like the wild craw that they make on there. You'll find that a combination of a crawfish pattern or shad pattern is going to be secondary to that chartreuse. Craw patterns come in a lot of different craw patterns. You have the brown craws, you got the green craws, you got some with chartreuse in them, you got some with red in them, some with orange in them. So a lot of times it's just a matter of the geographical color of the crawfish in that particular area. But I know Johnny's got the MB gizzard shad up there. Guys, take a look at that MB gizzard shad, because if you have a day when you've got a lot of wind and a bluebird type condition, that MB gizzard shad is a killer regardless of the water clarity that you have. I mean, it just works really, really good after a cold front comes through there. That's one of the things, even in dirty water. I mean, even if you've got water visibility of 12 inches, that's a bait that generates a lot of strikes post front during, cloudless conditions on like that. Another thing, let's go to jerkbaits a little bit. Jerkbaits is a little bit different for me because I'm fishing a jerkbait after a front, usually in cleaner water. And you need to use what I found in a jerkbait scenario is the translucent, more natural tone colors work really good. Megabass just came out with one called the Clear Laker. That Clear Laker, I have been absolutely wrecking them at Table Rock this year. Post front, pre front, doesn't really matter. But especially if you have a tough bite where you lose your wind a lot of times, you still have the clear water. Those translucent, shady looking colors like that Clear Laker is going to be highly effective, right after a front. I've been using that one. It's a Megabass 110 Junior +1 in the Clear Laker color. And, I've had 5 or 6 post front days on Table Rock and Bull Shoals both. And you tie that color on, it's just like candy. I mean, you can be throwing, traditional colors you like. They won't bite them, but there's something about that particular color that works really good post front. And that's a little bit different than, like I said, jerkbait and crankbait colors are completely different because you're dealing, with different, bank slopes. You're dealing with a different group of fish. So they all react a little bit differently. But just to overview real quick, lipless crankbaits and lip crankbaits start out early in the morning with some type of a mat tiger, fire tiger, wild craw. As the sun gets up, then switch to your crawfish patterns and your shad patterns on the crankbaits. And post front, stay with those diminutive, translucent, shady looking colors for a jerkbait. And that's what works for me, guys.
That's good stuff. And one thing, guys, to call out is that color is a factor, but it's definitely not the most important factor. That's why we talked about last on the stream. We covered where to fish, which is always going to be the most important, whether you're fishing deep, shallow, location. If you're not fishing around fish, it doesn't matter if you have the perfect color jerkbait. If there's no fish there, you're not going to catch any fish, period. And that's what we always try to, that's at least what I try to hammer home on Fish the Moment main channel. And then, talking about the wind, that can have a bigger impact on bait selection in terms of if you're fishing a jerkbait or a jig or a Ned rig. So profile of your bait is really important. And then finally is the color selection. So don't get caught up on color and try every single color of jerkbait that comes out on the market or crankbait or jig or whatever and fish the exact same spot. If you're fishing the same spot and you throw every color jerkbait on the market, it's not the jerkbait's fault. It's that you're fishing in an area without fish. So just keep that in mind. That's something you have to kind of take everything that we talk about and it's a whole puzzle. You have to put all the pieces together at the right time to make it work. There's no perfect solution there. Would you agree there, Randy?
Absolutely. I mean, there's, bass fishing is a puzzle, guys. And like I said, just be kind to yourself, because if you have days out there that you're frustrated and you feel like you don't know what you're doing out there, we all do. I don't care who you are, professional anglers, myself, Kevin Van Dam, everybody out there. We got days that we're just humbled and you're just scratching your head and you're frustrated. So that's the great thing about the sport. It makes you, those tough days like that make you appreciate the good days. And we're all in this together to learn, man. Nobody learns it all. Nobody has all the answers. Jonny and I are sharing stuff that works for us, things that we've learned, because we are, like Jonny says, we're bass nerds. We're students of the fish. We live and breathe it, and we're just trying to pass on a little bit of info that we've learned to you guys.
For sure. And just keep that in mind, guys. We're doing the best can to share information across as many lakes and things as possible. And, obviously we're not going to hit everything, but we do our best there. Now, one thing I do want to talk about, we're going to answer some really important questions here, so stay with us for just a minute. But one thing I did want to remind everyone is head over to fishmoment.com if you guys want to help support the content we're doing here, support the channel. Just head over here. One easy way to help support the channel is to check out our upcoming virtual seminars. We're going to be offering seminars on pre-spawn tournament patterns and also how weather affects bass. The pre-spawn tournament seminars I'm really excited about because Randy and I are going to be sharing the best patterns that you can use on any type of man-made lake, whether there's grass in it, shallow, dirty, anything like that, to help you succeed in tournaments. So if you're fishing tournaments this year in the spring, in the pre-spawn specifically, definitely check out the seminar. We're going to give you the best techniques. And in part of that, you may have seen a video I did a little while ago where I was breaking down the top baits from all of the Bassmaster Elite Series events from 2000 to 2010, 2020. And I'm going to be using a lot of this data that I'm going to dig out all the little nuggets out of it and share with you guys tips on the best techniques, the best types of cover, structure, baits, based on different types of lake, filter down the data, do a lot of digging into it for you guys so you can actually have some data and fact-based results in the seminar. So definitely check out that seminar if you guys are interested. And then you can also always, if you can't attend the seminar, you can always get a recording of this sent to you afterwards. So even if you can't attend live, which is actually going to be this Thursday, you can always sign up and we will send you a recording, and that way, even if you can't make it live, you can still watch it back afterwards as many times as you want. And then another thing just to remind you guys is that we have a bunch of personal lake breakdowns available, and we actually are snowed in here in Northwest Arkansas and Missouri, so Randy's going to be doing a lot more personal lake breakdowns. So if you do want a breakdown, normally they sell really fast, and we're out of them really quick. There's 8 available on the site right now, so definitely take advantage of this. Randy has some extra time. He can probably put a little bit of extra effort into maybe spending 4 hours. He can spend 5 hours because there's not really else much to do here. So definitely check out those personal lake breakdowns as well. So let's get to a few questions here, Randy. Anything else you have to say on any of that, though?
Yeah, definitely with that, those lake breakdowns, like I said, they're really going to help you out. If you have a lake that you fish a lot, or even if you don't fish it a lot, we spend a lot of time. We go in, we identify 40 key GPS areas. We give detailed explanations on how to approach those areas. And it just sort of gives you a good starting point and a foundation based upon the time of year you want. We make them all year long, spring to, summer, winter, and fall. So check them out, man. Put a lot of effort into them.
Okay, a lot of time and a lot of work. So couple questions here, Randy. One is they want Mike's asking if we can do some more content on smallmouth, and that's a whole other avenue we haven't really got into, just because smallmouth fishing, especially up north in the Great Lakes, to be able to talk about that, we need to actually be able to go up there and fish and make content. We don't really have a big audience up north. We have some people who are up north, but it's not really our core audience. But I'm going to be heading up to Wisconsin actually this summer, guys, to start doing some smallmouth fishing on Lake Michigan, also do some grass fishing on natural lakes, because I know there's a lot of people who are asking about how do you catch fish on natural lakes or smallmouth lakes, a Great Lake. And maybe something we can do, Randy, is travel around, do some fishing on different lakes. Someone mentioned that. Kind of show you guys how we approach it, because there are a lot of other types of fishing out there. We just kind of have to fish the lakes in our area because that's where we live. But, we have experience. I grew up in Wisconsin. I spent half my life there. And Randy's fished all over the country, fishing the professional tour. So we know how to fish those lakes. We just don't have access to them. So we're going to try to make as much content as we can for you guys going forward. But that's kind of an answer to that. Anything there, Randy?
Yeah, I love fishing northern smallmouth, man. I fished all across the northern tier states, all the Great Lakes like Champlain, Winnipesaukee, the Saranac chain of lakes, Boundary Waters, Minnetonka. I mean, there's nothing like big smallmouth in the summertime in clear water. It's got to be one of my favorite ways to catch bass, period.
For sure. It's fun. Once you land on them, too, it's just like game over. Yeah. Pretty fun. By the way, guys, this is the Fish Moment Live YouTube channel. So just so you guys know, this isn't the main Fish Moment channel. If you guys want videos that are a little bit more edited, structured, I spend like 30 hours a week editing one YouTube video for the main Fish the Moment channel. So you can find it linked down below, or just go to YouTube Fish the Moment. This is the live stream channel. So we do live streams like this and post little clips. Let me know too in the comments if you guys like the little clips we're posting about from these live streams. And just make sure you leave a like down this video, and also subscribe to the channel if you guys enjoy. Some of you guys are probably subscribed to the Fish the Moment channel, just not subscribed to the Fish the Moment Live channel. So go subscribe there. It helps us out. And also if you leave a like. Another question here, Randy, for you is, let's see here. Oh, got some guys saying that they can't spend any more money on baits, Randy. Their wives are getting mad because we're getting them to buy so many baits.
Man, I hear that a lot from everybody.
Question on co-angler stuff here from Jonathan. He says, when you have a limited amount of rods, what kind of rod would you throw a lipless crankbait on? So like for a co-angler, would you bring a dedicated crankbait rod for that, or would you just throw it on like any rod, especially when you have limited space?
I think a lot of that depends on the type of cover you're fishing the lipless crankbait on. If you're ripping it through the grass, you need something that's got a little bit more tip on it, a little bit faster tip. But if you're just like covering water, fishing points, fishing shallow water, you need a softer tip on there. But I would recommend some type of at least a 7-foot rod, 7.2, something that's just got some type of a medium fast tip on it. I think that'd cover most of the situations for it.
Perfect. And then got a question here from Gavrick73. He says that we have a lot of standing timber on his lake, and the fish are too deep for a jerkbait. What method would you go for to fish in 20 to 25 feet of water when there's timber? My go-to baits in those situations is one is that Fish Moment offshore jig. It has a double cable guard, weed guard. It'll come through a tree. You can cast it in the middle of a standing tree and it'll come out 100% of the time as long as you have those cables set properly. So that would be my number one bait. I even take that jig head sometimes, take the skirt off and just put like a swim bait on that jig head and work through the trees. But I also will put a weedless swim bait head, like the jewel bait gem shad swim bait head has like a little cable guard on it, and I'll throw that and you can actually work that through the trees. And so a swim bait, a weedless swim bait, on some sort of weedless jig head, or that Fish Moment offshore jig that has the double cable guard. Those are the best options that I've found for fishing deep timber. I don't know if you fish a lot of deep timber, Randy. Do you have any suggestions there?
Yeah, we fish it a lot here in Missouri at Table Rock, and a lot of it depends on the water clarity that you're fishing for that. But the three choices that I would make on that would be an Alabama rig, or some type of a swim bait, or some type of an underspin. And that's based upon how deep those fish are suspended, how clear the water is, but one of those three you'll probably catch them in those conditions.
Awesome, good stuff. Got Daniel says he can't imagine me fishing finesse techniques. I need to start fishing finesse techniques a little bit more, Randy. I feel like I'm leaving some fish on the lake, not picking up the spinning rod.
I've seen you whack them on the Neko rig on a spinning rod before, so you can definitely fish it for sure.
I know. It's not my go-to. I have to like force myself to do it. I don't know why. But, like pulling a spinning rod out of the box is like if I pull one out, I'm like my mood decreases by 20% every time that spinning rod comes out of the box. It's like if it's not a jig or a crankbait, I'm not happy. I'm not a happy camper. Maybe a swim bait too. Let's see here. Let's see. A couple more questions. If you guys have questions, post them down below. We're going to get one more. Let's see here. Randy heads. Jonathan asks, would love to see a video of Randy's rod and reel pairings with different baits. Actually, Jonathan, one thing you can do that actually not that many people know about is if you head over to fishthemoment.com, I actually put together something really cool a while back, and like I never talk about it, but it's under the digital guides tab on fishthemoment.com. And it's called the Ultimate Guide to Fishing Rods. And basically, if you go here, I went through and I classified every single fishing rod that I use based on baits, the type of bait, the weight of the bait. I also give you ideas of like what brand of rods I like for each size. I give you the exact actions, and these actions are lined up perfectly with the weight of the baits. You can cast it more effectively, all that stuff. It's the Fish the Moment Ultimate Rod Guide. I put a ton of time into it, getting it right. I just never talk about it, but definitely a good source, and it literally gives every bait I ever throw. It gives you recommendation on the rod, every style of bait, stuff like that. So something to check out if you wanted to check that out. There's a bunch of these like playbook things that I've done that are really useful guides. I just don't talk about them that much anymore. I spent like 50 hours on each of them, and sometimes I just kind of forget to talk about them. But under the digital guides, that's there. So don't want you stealing my thunder too much there, Randy. Don't give up that juice. We'll leave that juice for the digital guide.
Okay.
Okay, one more thing. Do you ever throw a swinging football head, and when and where? I love a swing head, Zach. It's actually a really good time of year to throw it right now. My go-to is like the Gamakatsu, just regular swing head, 1/2 ounce or 3/4 ounce, and I put a Strike King Menace grub on the back. And it's a great bait just to cover water when those fish are in that, I would say, anywhere from like 2 foot of water out to 15 to 20 feet of water, but they're not biting a crankbait. So if you're catching fish on a crankbait, for example, actually it's a great post-front bait, is if you're fishing and the fish are biting a crankbait really well during the front, and then you get post-front conditions, pick up that swing head, and let me just pull up the swing head just to kind of show you what I'm talking about. So no one is confused. Let me share this real quick. This is what I'm talking about, guys. When I'm saying swing head, it's like the articulating football head looks like this on a Texas rig. And I throw that with the Strike King Menace grub. That is a deadly way to catch him. That's actually how I caught him the other day when I was out on Lake 10 Killer catching him on a swing head. They wouldn't bite a football jig. They wouldn't bite a crankbait. But for whatever reason, they would bite that little Strike King Menace grub. And the Menace grub is a sweet little bait because it's a small little double twin tail. It doesn't look like much, but man, they will chew that thing on the back of a swing head. Good little deal right there. And you're just basically fishing on the bottom, just getting it in the bottom, reeling it in, just keeping it there. And just trying to maintain bottom contact while still reeling it in. So good deal there. Cool. Anything else, Randy, before we jump or before we sign off for the night?
No, just again, guys, thanks for joining in this evening. I think we had a really good bunch of guys here tonight. You know, we probably didn't have many from Texas because they don't have any power down there. But man, I can tell you guys just from the comments that we get on Fish the Moment and Johnny's channel and my channel is we got the most, like the greatest bunch of guys out there as far as just being passionate and really eager to learn and wanting to learn. And that just makes what we do so much more rewarding when you have somebody that's really into it and appreciative, for the information, and it makes a huge difference. So just thanks a lot. Appreciate it, guys.
Yeah, we really appreciate it, guys. There's so many of you who are supporting us on fishthemoment.com, over on the YouTube channels, liking the videos. honestly, guys, if you like the videos, the easiest thing to do to support us, you don't have to do anything. You don't have to spend money. I know not everyone's in a position to do that. Just by liking our videos, just like every single video with a thumbs up, that helps us so much with just the search algorithms, the way the YouTube algorithms work. Just leaving a like and subscribing. One thing we see is that only like 35% of the people who watch our videos are actually subscribed to the YouTube channel. Part of that is you have to get a Gmail account and actually sign up, and it takes a minute. But if you just do that, it's a free Gmail account. Subscribe to the channel, leave a thumbs up both on this channel, Fish Moment Live, the main Fish Moment YouTube channel, and then Randy's YouTube channel, Intuitive Angling with Randy Blockett. Those three things help us out so much and don't take any sort of monetary value there. So yeah, really appreciate all the support, guys. We are still amazed and shocked and feel very blessed every single day just with all the support we get, all the positive comments, and we really appreciate it. And we're going to keep grinding away, putting in the hours, making the best content we can for you guys so that you can hopefully become better fishermen this year and keep putting fish in the boat. So anything else, Randy, before we sign off?
No, that's it. Just stay safe out there, guys, and hopefully we'll see y'all next Tuesday.
Sounds
and
great.
Hopefully we'll see you this Thursday for our virtual seminar on the pre-spawn fishing patterns.
Yes, for sure. Sign up for that. We got a few spots left. So thanks again, guys, and we'll see you guys next Tuesday, 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. See you guys.